Frederick Douglass was born into slavery around 1818 in Talbot County. Historians are unsure about his real birthday. His mother was Native American and dad was African European. Originally born Frederick Bailey, his mother's maiden name, he took the name Douglass after he escaped slavery. Bailey tried escaping Covey's farm several times and finally succeeded in 1838, boarding a train to Havre de Grace, Maryland. He traveled through Delaware, a slave state at the time, then arrived in New York, a free state, and a safe haven for many escaped slaves. After he settled in New York, he sent for Anna Murray, a free black woman he met while in captivity. Douglass and Murray eventually married in September 1838. They had 5 children together. The couple later moved to New Bedford, Massachusetts. They met Nathan and Mary Johnson, born free colored people. They inspired Frederick and Anna to take the name Douglass, inspired from the Lady Lake. In New Bedford, Frederick was attending abolitionist meetings. He learned of the writings of William Lloyd Garrison. This was his inspiration for public speaking. In 1843, Frederick became part of the American Anti-Slavery Society's 100 Conventions project, where he spread ideals of the anti-slavery movement. Douglass was physically assaulted many times by people who opposed the anti-slavery movement. His hand broke and never completely healed on this 6-month tour throughout the US. 2 years after the tour, Douglass published the first and most famous of his 5 autobiographies, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave.
Later that year, Douglass went to Ireland and England, where he was impressed by the freedom compared to that in America. He met an Irish nationalist, Daniel O'Connell. He was an inspiration for his later work. While he was in the United Kingdom, he gave one of his most famous speeches. This speech was called the London Reception Speech. In 1847, Douglass would later return to America and start working on publishing his own abolitionist newspaper. His newspaper was called the North Star, and eventually he went on to cover women's rights pieces and formally changed the name of the North Star to Frederick Douglass Paper in 1851. This paper halted publication in 1860. Douglass was also at the Seneca Falls Convention in New York, 1848. This was a convention for women's rights where he was the only African American invited. During the Civil War, Douglass worked to free the enslaved and grant them voting rights. Early on in the war, Douglass supported Lincoln and his anti-slavery views. This, however, ended when Lincoln did not give slaves the right to vote, even after the war ended and slavery was abolished. By the time of Lincoln's passing, amendments were passed allowing colored persons to vote and ending slavery. Lincoln and Douglass had reconciled before this. Later in Douglass's life, he reconciled with the man who used to own him, and his wife, Anna, died in 1882. Douglass remarried 2 years after to a white activist named Helen Pitts. During the 1888 election, Douglass became the first African American to receive a presidential vote in a political party. Douglass stuck to being a public speaker and a social activist until his death in 1895. He was the victim of a heart attack while he was on his way home from the National Council of Women. Frederick Douglass was one of the most influential and important abolitionists, and thus concludes his life story.